like the entry music. This is a wonderful venue, by the way. You guys in Dublin really know how to get down. So first and foremost, by way of introduction, my name's Broudy. I run inside sales in the Americas at Mulesoft. And frankly, I imagine if I'm you right now, I'm probably wondering what the hell is some guy doing at a SaaS conference talking about Army Special Operations. And I promise there is some relevance to what you're doing, and I hope that what you leave with is I intend to equip you with the tools to have a ability to apply like a special operations mindset to building and scaling great teams. Just by way of introduction, I spent 6 years in Army Special Operations working in Army Ranger Regiment. I deployed twice to Iraq, 3 times to Afghanistan, and we were tasked with the specific mission of running direct action special operations raids against some of the most dangerous people on the planet. So essentially, we were flying to their house in the middle of the night, sometimes landing on their roof, and the rest is sort of history. So suffice to say, going from special operations to running a group of early career tech salespeople is what we might call a pivot in tech. I sometimes look at that and wonder if it ever happened. And even getting into special operations itself was not something I originally intended. I actually ended up in the Army by accident. So I was going to this school, UC Santa Barbara. How many people, show of hands, have been to Santa Barbara? Beautiful, beautiful. That is actually the house that I lived in that upper right corner sophomore year in college. So I was waking up every morning and surfing. I got really into working out because I had been a total shrimp my whole life. I still am. And I thought I was taking a 5 a.m. workout class. I thought I was taking a jogging class. So I show up at 5 a.m. at the track at UC Santa Barbara, and it turns out it was an Army ROTC class. And I'm not sure if you guys have a similar program here, but that's essentially this group that takes college kids and transforms them into Army officers. And at the time, there was 2 wars going on, and I realized that there was something to some of these individuals in this group. Like, some of them were super focused, super driven, and were going to be doing the most difficult thing possible at 22 years old right out of college. And I actually came to find out about this world over here, which is the world of Army Special Operations. And the way it works is, if you're an officer, you have to spend 4 years in the military before you can even apply for the unit. So you go through this brutal selection. We started with 360 people, and 16 ended up making it out the other end. And I actually declined my commission as an officer just to have the chance to try out for this unit, and it was far and away the best decision I've ever made. So the reason I give you all this context is making that leap, taking that leap and saying, look, I'm going to turn down the easy path here. I'm going to decline the prestige of being an officer in the Army. I'm going to go and enlist and just be one of the Joes. And if you wash out in this selection process, you go to the dreaded Big Army, as we called it, which is just the rest of the military. And the selection process really instilled in me this notion that if you are absolutely uncompromising in how you assess and select who you bring on board, you can achieve real greatness. This is a picture of a bunch of Navy SEALs. This joke goes over better in America, but Navy SEALs love to make movies about themselves and write books about how awesome they are. We sort of personally believed in being quiet professionals, and I recognize the irony of me now standing on stage talking about Ranger Regiment, but by virtue of being uncompromising in their hiring, they brought aboard only A players. And the reality is, it seems counterintuitive that having an incredibly grueling, difficult selection process would attract great people, but the reality is eagles want to soar with eagles, right? They don't want to fly with pigeons. So at Mulesoft, we believe in this idea that if you hire great performers, you build this virtuous cycle. And great performers build great culture, and a culture where people are driven to win and inspire everyone else around them to win, that breeds success. And that success attracts more A players, more eagles to soar with other eagles. And it's critical to be totally uncompromising. Jim Collins has this great quote where the moment you feel you need to tightly manage someone, you've made a mistake in who you've hired. Right? Great people need to be led, not managed. So I would honestly ask yourselves, assess right now, have you been willing to lower that hiring bar to get bodies in seats? We did this in Ranger Regiment once. This was on the left here, there was a show on Discovery Channel called 2 Weeks in Hell. And it was a story that followed an actual group of Green Berets, which is a similar unit. They're actually responsible for like training foreign forces to go and fight for them. They followed them through their selection process. And the cadre went through the selection process with all the candidates the same way they normally would, really physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically brutal and draining. And what ended up happening was everyone saw this show, was absolutely appalled with what actually goes on in these selections, and ended up firing the entire cadre. And as they were filming that show, they had approached Ranger Regiment and said, hey, we want to follow your selection process. And the show aired, and we found out about all the cadre getting fired, and we were now of the mind that if we actually put people through the same selection that we normally did, we would absolutely have our asses handed to us and probably lose our jobs. So they actually changed the name of the selection from the Ranger Indoctrination Program, which fittingly had the acronym of RIP, to the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, I believe. And this class that went through when they filmed this hell and back Special Ops Rangers actually had the highest pass-through rate, and 12 months later had 4x the churn that a normal cohort would. So lowering that bar absolutely put the wrong people on the bus. And I can tell you, because I had to manage them, not lead some of these individuals, it was the worst class I've ever dealt with. So at Mulesoft, we recognize, look, we're not going to put you in a hiring process where we're going to brutalize you and haze you and subject you to psychological trauma, I promise. But we don't believe that we should just take unnecessary sacrifices for the purpose of driving a great candidate experience. And we know that our hiring process is far from flawless, but in this quest to find A-plus players only, we'd much rather pass on a potential A player than take a chance and miss. And I would ask yourself, like, are you willing to do the same? Because that's the real application of that special operations mindset, is knowing that, like, these people are literally going to war with you, or maybe metaphorically going to war with you, and you need to trust that they are the kind of people that you would follow into the breach. The second principle and real lesson that I've learned, and this seems intuitive just reading it, but I promise it's not, it's this idea that the top teams are mission and values driven. And I think we just heard it, but to drill down, question yourself, like, can your team, like, show of hands, raise your hand if you believe everyone on your team could actually articulate verbatim your core mission statement, and most importantly, your core values. Kyle, yeah, I believe that. This is absolutely critical to actually anchoring people in a shared purpose. Like, how can you all really be driving towards the same goals if you don't even know what your own collective team values are? And we have this thing here on the right, we called it the Ranger Creed. It was 6 stanzas. We had to know verbatim. It was like the Our Father of Ranger Regiment. And you might be called at any time to recite this. This is what they read when your friends died. And the reality was, it was so easy as a leader to just anchor bad behavior back in the fact that someone was failing to embody the Ranger Creed. And because of that, we were so much more effective. You know, this was focus on fundamentals. And at Mulesoft, we're of the same mind, right? We have this really big, hairy, audacious mission, which is to help the world change and innovate faster by connecting all their applications, data, and devices. But the way we actually execute on that isn't just great product. It's having a sense of shared values, right? It's this idea that if you're fearless, like you're willing to really truly operate in a flat organization where I can walk up to Greg Schott every day and say, look, Greg, I think we need to make some change, and feel unafraid to do that. And more importantly, if you look at Own It, unafraid to actually take that on myself and drive that through to fruition, only then can we be operating on the same sheet of music. And this is what drives this. And this is from our S1 when we IPO'd in March. Right? We're working with 45% of the Global 500. We've got over 1,000 enterprise customers. And this is what we're really proud of. It's like 21 to 1 people would recommend they want to work at Mulesoft. And the thing about Ranger Regiment is it was literally the most difficult job. And of all the special operations units, frankly, we were kind of treated the worst, because we had to put on dog and pony shows for the Army every time some general would show up. And the reality is we still loved it. The esprit de corps, the morale was incredibly, incredibly high. And you have to think, this idea in tech that we should create a great culture, culture is one of the, if not the single most overused word in Silicon Valley and in SaaS, undoubtedly. And it tends to mean or be associated with things like having ping pong tables, free yoga, lunches 3 days a week, and paying well. And granted, we do all of those things, but culture is about this shared sense of mission and purpose and driving towards something bigger. And that is culture. And you need to recognize, right? In Ranger Regiment, we literally ate, slept, and died with these people. But you are spending the majority of your waking hours with the people you work with. Why wouldn't you demand excellence in your culture? Why wouldn't you demand that everyone drives towards a shared mission and a shared sense of values? And last, there's this idea of fostering a shared consciousness to drive empowered execution that has made an organization like Ranger Regiment an Army Special Operations unit that was fighting a networked enemy that was constantly adapting and evolving, and combating that enemy in tandem with different teams from disparate special operations units that had never worked together, frankly, doing it in a very cohesive and effective way. Now, part of that was we templatized a lot of our frameworks. So SEAL Team 6 would brief a mission the same way Ranger Regiment would, because I could then look at them and say, I think you need to revise your exfil plan. And we all were operating on that same sheet of music. If you look at even VCs might have a portfolio of companies and not have a shared sense of metrics, and there's no calibration across different companies. But shared consciousness and empowered execution extends beyond that. This guy, Stanley McChrystal, so he was the commander of 2nd Ranger Battalion, which was the unit I was in, and then he commanded all of Joint Special Operations Forces. He's actually the guy who famously was fired for saying terrible things about Obama and Rolling Stone. So maybe that strikes a chord. But what he focused on, knowing that you had Army Special Operations, Naval Special Operations, Air Force Special Operations, needing to operate on the same sheet of music, probably, I don't know what that would be, but needing to operate on that same sheet of music required the maximum amount of information being shared all the time. He would host a daily 1,000+ person all-hands meeting. And that would drive this shared consciousness. We're all getting the same information. And now that I have equipped you with that information, he as a general could say, look, my intent for the mission is that we go and kill or capture the shadow governor of the Paktia province, but I'm not going to actually tell you how to go and execute on it. You're going to own it. And there's this great story that he tells, because he used to literally, we slept during the day and we'd work at night, so he'd wake up any time during the day that someone wanted to drop a 2,000-pound bomb on some really bad person. And he would wake up and say, yep, do it, and then he'd go back to sleep. I think he would probably read who we were going to do it and ask some good questions, but he realized, he's like, I never say no. I never say no, so why do I even wake up? So the next time he had one of these all-hand O&I meetings, he literally said, he planted the question in the audience, someone said, hey, I want to drop a 2,000-pound JDAM tomorrow. Do I need to wake you up and ask for permission? He said, no, and my intent is that no one ever does that. You all own that decision yourself. Ultimately, you're the ones who have to sleep with it. And it was that kind of belief in sharing the maximum amount of information that actually gave him the ability to equip his leaders to lead. And I imagine, like, especially for some of you founders and CEOs, that it's hard to sort of let your hands off the reins. But if you focus on creating the shared consciousness, you have a better chance of doing that. Now, I'll caveat that. You've got to communicate in a way where you are being incredibly direct with people so that they can be on that same sheet of music. And this is from Kim Scott, who wrote the book Radical Candor. How many of you guys are familiar with this concept? Highly, highly recommend it. So on the y-axis is this idea on this quadrant of how much do you demonstrate that you care personally in how you communicate. And on the x-axis is how directly you are willing to actually challenge the people you're working with. And the ideal state is to be in this radical candor quadrant in the upper right. Now, a lot of people in tech, in my experience, maybe this is San Francisco, tend to fall in this ruinous empathy quadrant, where they genuinely care, you're well aware, but they're not willing to challenge you directly. And a lot of ex-Ranger Regiment guys probably tend to fall in this obnoxious aggression quadrant. And I know, like, I came from a world where we literally went to people's houses and cleared rooms. So if we're training and I go left in a room and your job is to go right, and you go left instead, like, I'm not going to say, hey, like, John, I just want you to understand that my feedback right now is coming from a place of genuinely caring, and I really want to see that you develop as a professional. But next time, could you make sure you go right? Usually it was like, do your fucking job, right? And the reality is the stakes were a lot higher. Because if I go left in a room, and you go left in a room, and there's a guy in the right corner, we literally both die. And that's not fun. So, truthfully, this has been difficult for me. It's like something I'm genuinely making a daily effort to do. Like, that deep demonstration of care is important, but what I would say is assess where you fall on this quadrant, and if you're in that ruinous empathy quadrant, make an attempt to move to the right. Like, be more direct, and only then can you foster this sense of shared consciousness and empowered execution. So I'll leave you with this. Applying a special operations mindset, it's not, going out every day and shooting 800-meter targets or training at night under night vision. Applying a special operations mindset is being uncompromising in your unwillingness to lower the bar when bringing aboard talent. Like, there is no butts in seats when you are driving a special operations type of operation. The second is anchoring everything you do in your shared mission, your shared values, and your shared sense of purpose, and constantly referencing it and validating that people actually understand it. And the last is sharing the maximum amount of information in a way where you both demonstrate deep personal care and you're extremely direct with people, where you are therefore capable of empowering people to actually own and execute everything on their own. So that's all I have. Thank you.